Sifter for the ear.
News, interviews, reviews, cinema, TV, streaming. Action!
Hi y'all, this is Jerry Williams, aka TV Jerry. In my coming attractions after the interviews, I don't usually include the Fathom specials that are either some sort of temporary special screening or special revival. This week there are some pretty cool ones, so I thought I'd let you know about them. Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair will show December 4th at 12 p.m., and this is a back-to-back screening of both films. There's also a documentary on The Cure and a taped version of the Broadway hit Merrily We Roll Along that'll be showing over the weekend.
The other thing to know about his father-in-law is he was 93 at that point. And so we had to move quickly while he still had his health to go and meet him in the gorge.
That was today's guest, Charles D. Thompson Jr., talking about the urgency of completing this documentary before one crucial resident was no longer around. Charles is the director and executive producer of Rock Castle Home, which is about this unique community in the Blue Ridge Mountains and how it evolved and later vanished. It's being screened as part of a series of programs at the Library of Virginia, highlighting stories of displacement in Virginia communities. House to Highway, Reclaiming a Community History. Charles will be in attendance on Friday, December 7th at 2 p.m. to host his screening and have a discussion. Today, we'll talk about how his personal background inspired this and other books and documentaries that he's created.
Sifter Review of the Week.
Flight Risk on HBO. Michelle Dockery is cast as an air marshal who's assigned to accompany a mob witness to trial, Topher Grace. Their flight across the Alaskan wilderness soon turns dangerous when the pilot's true identity is revealed, Mark Wahlberg. Almost all of this takes place on a small plane, so it's up to director Mel Gibson to make the thrills take flight. First, there's lots of stupidity in the script, which simply can't be overcome. Dockery does okay as the one in charge, and Grace brings his comic ability to make his character enjoyable. Wahlberg goes all out to create a creep, but his over-the-top performance is an embarrassment. Even though he's supposed to be balding, the first scene without his cap clearly shows the shaved hairline. Obviously, Gibson is versed in going too far, so he certainly gets some of the fault. If you give in to the cheesy aspects and want a mindless thriller, this isn't horrible. I gave Flight Risk 2 out of 5 stars. Charles Thompson, welcome to Sifter for the Ear. I want to talk about your movie, of course, in a minute, but first I want to know, you have a BA from Emory and Henry College, so that's your Virginia connection. But how did you find an interest in farm workers and agriculture, which are two of your subjects in your books and your movies?
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate the invitation. Yeah, I'm born and raised in Virginia, went to college in Virginia. I am the grandson of a small farmer in Franklin County, Virginia. That's how my interest in agriculture began. I think I've always had a leaning toward working with what my grandfather would have called the little man. That's what he referred to himself as. In other words, the regular people who work in agriculture. I have been a small farmer later in my life too. I have gravitated toward those people who are here in this country as immigrant workers as well. And I think that there's a resonance between the family that I was born into and my ancestors and those people who come to this country to work in the field.
Now, you started with books. What made you decide you want to write books?
I had been drawn to doing work with rural people. I was a farm organizer at one point, and then I started working with some people who were from Mexico who were helping me on my farm part-time. I began to be very interested in their lives as immigrants. Eventually, I started to realize I had a lot more questions than I had answers to agricultural questions and questions of justice and immigration, all of those things. So I decided to go back to graduate school. I did that. I actually worked in Guatemala as my field work in anthropology, and I wanted to understand the lives of refugees. And so that's what I was first writing about. That became my first book. It was called Borders Bleed. I took that dissertation back to Guatemala, to this town of indigenous people, Maya people, and we put it in the library. But I realized really early on that isn't a great way to communicate with the people that I was writing about. Eventually, I also decided that another form of communication, although I still write, another form of communication that I wanted to try was filmmaking.
And that was going to be my next question. How'd you get into documentaries?
Yeah, especially with people who speak another language. I thought, I want to try to find this filmmaking strategy. Started working with some friends who are more technically oriented. And so I love what the result is. I love being able to have a product that many different people can see. And with the use of subtitles, we can make products in different languages simultaneously. And so the reason that I gravitated to filmmaking was to be able to better communicate with lots of different types of people.
Surprise guest drop in.
Of course, we want to talk specifically about Rock Castle Home because that's the movie that's going to be showing at the Library of Virginia. But somebody wanted to drop in and talk a little bit about that event at the library, and then we'll get back to talking about the movie.
Footnote.
Anne McCrary is a program specialist at the Library of Virginia.
Thank you so much for having me. So we're really excited to be hosting a free screening of Rock Castle Home at the Library of Virginia at 2 p.m. on Friday, December 12th. This event is one in a series of programs highlighting stories of displacement in Virginia communities as part of the library's programming related to our current exhibition, House to Highway: Reclaiming a Community History. That exhibition explores the history of Richmond's Jackson Ward neighborhood, spanning a period from 1767 through the 1950s, when eminent domain displaced many residents and businesses of Jackson Ward for the construction of the Richmond-Petersburg Turnpike.
Which is now 6495, cutting right through the middle of the city.
Exactly. The exhibition explores the story through the lens of the Skipwith Roper family. In the wake of the American Revolution, Abraham Peyton Skipwith purchased his own freedom and became the first Black homeowner in what is now Jackson Ward. His descendants were able to build generational wealth in the 19th century, becoming part of Jackson Ward's thriving Black middle class. And the house that Skipwith built, known as the Skipwith Roper Cottage, stood in Jackson Ward until it was moved in 1957 with the construction of the highway, which displaced more than 1,000 residents and businesses. So this exhibition we're doing in partnership with the Jackson Project. We've been fantastic partners in all of this. And there we'll be opening a reconstructed version of the Skipwith Roper Cottage in Jackson Ward this April.
Wow.
The exhibition is on view at the library now through February 28th, and then we'll move to the new Jackson House when it opens in April.
Charlie, have you and Ann met yet?
We haven't met except online. So it's really nice to meet you, Ann. Thank you for
it's nice
inviting
to
me.
meet you too. I look forward to meeting you in person for real.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to be here in a couple of
It's a
weeks.
great event, and I'm so glad to be part of it. I have a lot of family members in Richmond. I think they're coming, so that's all good.
It's really cool for us to be able to kind of make these connections across the state. So with the exhibit, while we're located just blocks away from Jackson Ward, we do serve the whole state, and we're always looking for opportunities to make connections between different community stories across Virginia. So as a part of our programming around this exhibition, we're hosting a series of events highlighting stories of displacement in Virginia communities across the whole state. This includes other communities affected by urban renewal, like Charlottesville's Vinegar Hill. We had a screening a couple weeks ago of Raised, which was great, as well as stories of displacement due to eminent domain in rural communities like Rock Castle Gorge or Shenandoah National Park. We're also going to be announcing a few additional programs that are going to be virtual lectures on displacement in Virginia communities as well. So stay tuned for that soon.
Cool. And of course, I'll have a link on the webpage for this show to the library and to this event so people can check it out and come see it and see Charlie in person.
Fantastic.
Well, thanks for dropping in, Ann.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Okay, let's go back to Rock Castle Home. So how did this come about? Where did you first hear about Rock Castle? And then how did you decide, I'm going to make a movie about this?
My grandfather grew up in a community not very far from Rock Castle Home, and I went there and stayed as a teenager, and that was only like 1 mile away from Rock Castle. And so I'd always wanted to go back, and eventually I did go back to explore, and I'd always been intrigued by these very old chimneys that long after the chestnut log cabins had gone and all of the wood had disappeared and rotted back into the ground, these chimneys still stand. And they don't have any mortar.
Wow.
They're just made with mud and rocks. And there are a whole lot of them in the Rock Castle area. And that was the beginning of my interest. I also play music. I was playing music at the Floyd Country Store, which is well known in the region. We have a jam on Sunday afternoons, and I was sitting beside a man that I had gotten to know. His name is Andy Buckman. He told me he really wanted me to meet his father-in-law, who grew up in the Rock Castle Gorge. And the other thing to know about his father-in-law is he was 93 at that point.
Wow.
So we had to move quickly while he still had his health to go and meet him in the gorge and to find out about his life there. And so we got permission, and I took a film camera woman with me into the gorge to meet Matt Hubbard for the very first time. He had a four-wheeler, and so he brought that in his truck, drove it off a ramp, got on the four-wheeler, and there he was sitting when I arrived.
Uh-huh.
He immediately got into a mode of narration that said to me, this is the perfect person to tell the story of Rock Castle. I'm so glad that we brought a camera. Let's mic you. And he began what you will see in the film as an eloquent and well-worded narration in his own words, not reading, as though he had been waiting for decades to tell this story.
Yeah, he was a natural.
He was a natural, and he also really, really wanted this story to be told. He walked up to his old home place where his great-grandparents had helped raise him. The poignant part of that story for me is that I realized that he was one of the last children left in the gorge by the time he was 5 years old and growing on up.
Before I forget, I wanted to ask, why Rock Castle? I know because I've seen the documentary, but for anybody who hadn't, why is it called Rock Castle?
We know that there were rock crystals in the region. You can see some of these rock crystals on a local church. The first settlers of Europe looked at these six-sided crystals and thought they looked like castle turrets.
Right.
And they said, this is reminding us of castle. Maybe let's call this Rock Castle. Eventually became a small town with its own post office. And as it turns out as well, and I've talked with indigenous peoples about this, the quartz crystal was sacred much before the Europeans arrived. We've done that twist on words, Rock Castle Home, as a title because it is about those people who were really there and who were deeply devoted to the place and to their families and still are. Their descendants still go back.
Obviously, the focus later in the documentary is about the Blue Ridge Parkway, but you spend a lot of the documentary earlier establishing that community. You talked about the whiskey and the agriculture and the music and the chestnuts. I'm assuming that was intentional to set up that community so that you would understand what happened when it disappears, essentially.
Right. As Anne McCreary already talked about, the theme of this program is displacement.
Right.
In order to understand what one loses, one has to know about the value of what one had. For people who've never had to live with their own ingenuity by their own hands and taking a very steep and rocky natural area and think about making a living, we had to make that clear. And so we're talking about everything from picking up chestnuts to turning apples and corn into whiskey, and which was very legal up until Prohibition. And to answer the question, how did people even survive in here? It was more than
really.
survive. They raised families, they had clothing, they ordered from catalogs. One man even built an electric generator that ran off the water power well before electricity came into that area. And everybody would gather at his house and listen to the radio powered by the water. That says a lot about the ingenuity of those people.
So how long was your shoot and how big was your crew? I know you did 2 reunions, so you had to be there at least.
Right. I mean, one of the first shoots that we did was one of those reunions, and I introduced myself and asked permission. But by the second reunion, we had interviewed a lot of the individuals, and so we knew who we wanted to zero in on. And by that time, I'd already interviewed Matt Hubbard a number of times. So yeah, that was 2 reunions, 2 falls, and another 6 months or so for editing. As I was saying before, Mr. Matt Hubbard was 93 when we first filmed him, and so time was of the essence. So he wanted to be sure that I got all the facts right. And he said, if you don't get it right, I'm going to come back to haunt you. And then he laughed, and we finished it during the pandemic. we made a beeline as soon as we had a working copy to his house. He met us on the carport, everybody masked up. I set up a large computer screen. We showed it to him. He sat about 4 feet away from that screen, and he sat there and watched it like a hawk, and I was thinking, uh-oh. If somebody says something that, the narration isn't exactly right, he's going to say, Charlie.
Yeah.
And so I was just waiting at the end of the film, the credits are rolling and so forth. And then there was silence. And I realized he was deeply moved. And I think he was in tears.
Wow.
Sitting there with his head down, said, Mr. Matt, what did you think? He said, I think that was good. I said, is there anything I need to change? He said, there's not a thing I want you to change.
Wow.
And I knew that was our go ahead to show it to the world. And then we showed it, of course, to the community of descendants, and we showed it in Floyd, and we showed it at the country store, and we showed it at different local places. We showed it in Roanoke and Blacksburg. It was really very gratifying to see the region come out. And then, of course, it became a PBS broadcast through Blue Ridge Television. There's no substitute for seeing it in person. I always love seeing work with the artist. And I hope that even if people have already seen it on public television, that they will come out, because we're having a discussion about the meaning of place and displacement. And I'll be there and I can talk about it in person.
Now, there was one thing that I noticed was interesting in the documentary where you talk about these old stories that came from generations back, and you have different people telling the stories. And I wanted to ask if it was an editing decision or what, because 3 or 4 people tell the same stories and you cut from one to the other and they just pick up. It's almost like they had memorized it. Mm-hmm. Was that planned up front, or did that just happen once you got into the editing?
No, we didn't plan it up front. So it's a very funny scene, but so moving to me at the same time, because people cherish the stories from this area as part of their family heritage. And we would interview people in different places at their homes or public locations, wherever it might be, alone, right? And so we started realizing that the stories that were told were so closely aligned that we could use editing and have 6 people telling one story.
Yeah.
They fill in the blanks for one another, and it worked. And I have to credit Elena Rue, who was one of the camera women on the film and also an excellent editor, who thought of this at first, and she ran it by me. And we not only did it with one story about the famed moonshine car, we'll call it, to the story of the hanging tree. And those two, the hanging tree and the moonshine car, people could tell you verbatim what happened.
And they just lined up. It was amazing, because you're right.
And it lines up. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's like, yeah, we got to do this. And people always laugh when those scenes come up. And the one about the moonshine car ends with the line, and it's still there. And everyone in the whole audience of the descendant says, yeah, I see it. And it's like, yeah. And then we were able to give the audience watching the film the payoff that we filmed that car. Yes, that is a true story. It really is there. So that was fun.
One question I always like to ask everybody, when you're not working on your own documentaries or writing your own books, what have you been watching lately on TV or streaming?
We watched a PBS series based on a true story recently called Little Bird. We loved that. I mentioned earlier that I'd worked with indigenous peoples, and we always want to tell the story with indigenous people. If we were saying something, the saying is nothing about us without us. And I've been dedicated to that. But in this case, for Little Bird, it was like all indigenous people are on the crew. They're the actors. They tell the story. And it is a traumatic story about removal, that same theme of children from their homes, forced to go live in orphanages and those sorts of things in Canada. Yeah, it's a well done thing, and it's so moving because you can watch a documentary about the making of it. The other thing I just watched was really interesting filmmaking was the movie Frankenstein by Guillermo del Toro.
Beautiful, yeah.
That was an
Did you get
amazing.
to see it in the theater?
No,
Well, as you saw, it's such a grand film. It really needed to be on the big screen.
I agree. We tried, and it was already gone by the time we got it together to go. But we have, a decent screen now in the house and a good sound system, so that helped. But yeah, it's just like the story of a poignant search. I guess you could say a search for home too.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it ends with a search, really. It's like, how do I find myself and how do I find where I'm supposed to be? These are questions that I've explored a lot about. And so
Right.
I guess I'm drawn to watching those kinds of things too.
It's a great movie. That helps.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Well, Charles, I want to thank you so much for this. It was a fascinating documentary. It's an interesting subject, and I will not be there at the library, but have a good time enjoying Virginia and Richmond, I mean.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for being interested in the film. And we'll do our best. We'll be there. I look forward to meeting people in person. Thank you.
Good deal. Thank you. That was Charles D. Thompson Jr., the director and executive producer of the documentary Rock Castle Home, which is about this unique community in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's being screened as part of a series of programs at the Library of Virginia highlighting stories of displacement in the state, called House to Highway, Reclaiming a Community History. Charles will be in attendance on Friday, December 12th at 2 p.m. at the library to showcase his film. And I'll have a link on the webpage for the show at TV Jerry.
Coming soon. In theaters.
Hamnet. The latest from Chloe Zhao stars Paul Mescal as Shakespeare and Jessie Buckley as his wife in this drama about his inspiration for Hamlet. Five Nights at Freddy's 2. This is the sequel to the thriller about a Chuck E. Cheese-style place where the animatronics get lethal, and this time they leave the building. Fackham Hall. This is a comedy spoof on Downton Abbey. 100 Nights of Hero. When a charming house guest arrives at a remote castle, the dynamic between a neglectful husband and his innocent bride is thrown into chaos. Jujutsu Kaisen, Execution. This is a compilation movie that recaps the show's Season 2 and includes new footage from the beginning of Season 3.
TV and streaming.
Jay Kelly on Netflix. After a short theatrical run, this drama arrives starring George Clooney as a famous movie star, directed by Noah Baumbach with Adam Sandler and Laura Dern. The Family McMullen on HBO. A close-knit family navigates life's up and downs. From director Edward Byrne. Little Disasters on Paramount Plus. A group of new mother friends are torn apart when one is accused of injuring her baby, fracturing their bond and nearly destroying their families, with Diane Kruger. Paul Anka His Way on HBO. A documentary about the singer and his career. Man vs. Baby on Netflix. This is the latest wacky comedy starring Rowan Atkinson. Predators on Paramount Plus. This explores the controversial NBC series that caught potential child predators in sting operations, leading to arrest and its eventual cancellation. Simon Cowell, The Next Act on Netflix. This is about Cowell's journey to create a hit boy band, showing behind-the-scene footage from Audition. Merv on Prime. A recently separated couple take their shared dog on a holiday trip to cheer him up, but end up reconnecting romantically. You can subscribe to this podcast on the usual platforms or go to TV Jerry, click on the podcast tab, and there's a link to enroll. This is Jerry Williams. Thanks for listening.
For more Sifter, including literally thousands of reviews,
Visit tvjerry.com.
That's a wrap.